Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. Here is what's happening. President Biden keeping his August 31st deadline, pulling U.S. troops from Afghanistan in just a week. But how many people will they be able to evacuate by then? And what happens if they can't get everyone out?
There's a lot of guilt, to have to make a decision to send your kids into an environment that, is not safe.
Parents torn about sending their kids back to school in states where mask mandates are banned. The ACLU filing lawsuits to try and change that.
My patient today suddenly got totally worse, and we're doing everything that we can, and I don't know if that's going to be enough.
A rare look inside an Oregon ICU where nurses and doctors are fighting to keep patients alive. We start tonight with President Biden keeping the August 31st Afghan deadline. Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memley. Mike, I apologize. I keep doing this to you, asking you questions about an announcement that the president hasn't officially made yet, but he's really running late today. So let's talk about what happened earlier. The president, under a whole lot of pressure, both at home and abroad, to push back this deadline. Clearly, he's not caving. I know we'll hear more from him shortly, but what are we hearing from the White House about the criticism that this is just too soon?
Well, first of all, Allison, part of the explanation for why the president has postponed his remarks several times today actually is because they want him to also address the vote that we just saw in the House on his infrastructure and budget proposals. Obviously, a significant achievement we'd be probably talking about.
And they were also late.
For the crisis in Afghanistan, exactly, Allison. But what the president is expected to do, based on our information from administration sources, is basically to lay out the plan moving forward as it relates to that August 31st deadline. He's sticking with the plan to remove all U.S. forces by August 31st, but with a little bit of a caveat here. The conditions on the ground are changing, as we've been seeing so much hour by hour, and the president asked his team to develop contingency plans should the mission of evacuating as many Americans and also Afghan allies as possible face any hurdles along the way. And so the president, we know, has been under this pressure you mentioned, not just from our international allies. He met with the members of the G7 this morning, who were encouraging him to push back that extension, but also Democrats in Congress, even those who have been supportive of his decision amid all the criticism from others, have said that really he should just call the Taliban's bluff here if it's determined that we need more time to get Americans out. And so the president will explain his decisions at this point, but also hold firm to the fact that the decision to more broadly withdraw and end our 20-year operation in Afghanistan was the right one. At least he's confident what history will judge.
Mike Memley, thank you so much. We are going to hand it over to an NBC News special report. The president is finally speaking.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day, everyone. We're coming on the air ahead of President Biden's remarks on the crisis in Afghanistan. Officials say the president will stick to the current deadline a week from today for the withdrawal. Here is the president now.
Before I update you on the meeting that I had with leaders of the G7 earlier today, I want to say a word about the progress we're making on the Build Back Better agenda here at home. I just got off the telephone with the leaders in the House. Today, the House of Representatives taken a significant step toward making a historic investment that's going to transform America, cut taxes for working families, and position the American economy for long-term growth. When I became president, it was clear that we had to confront an immediate economic crisis, the most significant recession we've had since the Depression, or at least since Johnson. But that wasn't going to be enough. We also had to make some long-term investments in Americans and America itself. The first thing we did was to write and pass the American Rescue Plan, and it's working. Our economy has added 4 million jobs in my first 6 months in office. Economic growth is up to the fastest it's been, the fastest rate in 40 years, and unemployment is coming down. Right now, our economic growth is leading the world's advanced economies. But to win the future, we need to take the next step. Today, the House of Representatives did just that. Today's vote in the House allowed them to consider my Build Back Better agenda, a broad framework to make housing more affordable, bring down the cost of prescription drugs by giving Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices for drugs, make elder care more affordable, provide 2 years of free universal high-quality pre-K and 2 years of free community college, provide clean energy tax credits, continue to give the middle-class families the well-deserved tax cut for daycare and health care that they deserve, allowing a lot of women to get back to work primarily, and provide significant monthly tax cuts for working families with children through the child care tax credit. These investments are going to lower out-of-pocket expenses for families and not just give them a little more breathing room. In addition, we're going to make long overdue, much-needed investments in basic, hard infrastructure of this nation. This is an area where we have broad bipartisan agreement to invest in our antiquated roads, highways, bridges, transit, drinking water systems, broadband, clean energy, environmental cleanup, and making our infrastructure more resilient to the climate crisis, and so much more. And this is all paid for. Instead of giving every break in the world to corporations and CEOs, by the way, 55 of our largest companies in America paid $0 in federal taxes on more than $40 billion in profit last year. We can ask corporations and the very wealthy just to pay their fair share. They can still be very wealthy, they can still make a lot of money, but just begin to pay their fair share. So we can invest in making our country stronger and more competitive, create jobs and raise wages, and lift up the standard of living for everyone. The bottom line is, in my view, we're a step closer to truly investing in the American people, positioning our economy for long-term growth, and building an America that outcompetes the rest of the world. My goal is to build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not just the top down. And that's what we're on our way of doing. Look, I want to thank Speaker Pelosi, who was masterful in her leadership on this, and Leader Hoyer and Whip Clyburn and Chairman DeFazio, the entire House leadership team, for the hard work, dedication, and determination to bring people together so we can make a difference in people's lives. I also want to thank every Democrat in the House who worked so hard over the past few weeks to reach an agreement and who supported the process for House consideration of the Jobs and Infrastructure Plan, the Build Back Better effort. There were differences, strong points of view. They're always welcome. What is important is that we came together to advance our agenda. And I think everyone who did that, I think everyone who did it was there. Look, I also want to thank everyone who voted to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. You know, advancing, it's an act to restore and expand voting protections, to prevent voter suppression, and to secure the most sacred of American rights, the right to vote freely, the right to vote fairly, and the right to have your vote counted. The House has acted. The Senate also has to join them to send this important bill to my desk. And the Senate has to move forward on the People's Act, critical legislation to protect our democracy and the right to vote. We need both of those election bills. But let me now turn to Afghanistan. I've met this morning with my counterparts in the G7, as well as heads of the United Nations, NATO, and the European Union. I express my thanks for the solidarity we have seen as we've stood up an unprecedented global effort. I updated our partners on the significant progress we made in the past 10 days. As of this afternoon, we've helped evacuate 70,700 people just since August the 14th. 75,900 people since the end of July. Just in the past 12 hours, another 19 U.S. military flights, 18 C-17s and 1 C-130 carrying approximately 6,400 evacuees, and 31 coalition flights carrying 5,600 people have left Kabul just in the last 12 hours. A total of 50 more flights, 12,000 more people since I updated you this morning. These numbers are a testament to the efforts of our brave service women and men, to our diplomats on the ground in Kabul, and to our allies still standing with us. And we had a productive discussion. There was strong agreement among the leaders about both about the evacuation mission underway, as well as the need to coordinate our approach to Afghanistan as we move forward. First, on evacuation, we agreed that we will continue to close cooperation to get people out as efficiently and safely as possible. We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out and no disruptions to our operations. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable should that become necessary. I'm determined to ensure that we complete our mission, this mission. I'm also mindful of the increasing risks that I've been briefed on and the need to factor those risks in. They're real and significant challenges that we also have to take into consideration. The longer we stay, starting with the acute and growing risk of an attack by a terrorist group known as ISIS-K, an ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan, which is a sworn enemy of the Taliban as well. Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians. Additionally, thus far, the Taliban have been taking steps to work with us so we can get our people out. But it's a tenuous situation. We're already had some gunfighting break out. We run a serious risk of it breaking down as time goes on. Second, the G7 leaders and the leaders of the EU, NATO, and the UN all agreed that we will stand united in our approach to the Taliban. We agreed the legitimacy of any future government depends on the approach it now takes to uphold international obligations, including to prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for terrorism. And we agreed that none of us are going to take the Taliban's word for it. We'll judge them by their actions, and we'll stay in close coordination on any steps that we take moving forward in response to the Taliban's behavior. At the same time, we renewed our humanitarian commitment to the Afghan people and supported a proposal by the Secretary General Guterres of the United Nations-led international response with unfettered humanitarian access in Afghanistan. Third, we talked about our mutual obligation to support refugees and evacuees currently fleeing Afghanistan. The United States will be a leader in these efforts, and we'll look to the international community and to our partners to do the same. We're already seeing our allies' commitment. They're bringing to their countries the Afghans who served alongside their forces as translators or in their embassies, just as we're bringing to the United States those Afghans who worked alongside our forces and diplomats. We're continuing that effort. We're conducting thorough security screening in the intermediate stops they're making for anyone who is not a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident of the United States. Anyone arriving in the United States will have undergone a background check. And we must all work together to resettle thousands of Afghans who ultimately qualify for refugee status. The United States will do our part, and we are already working closely with refugee organizations to rebuild a system that was purposely destroyed by my predecessor. Finally, we agreed to stay vigilant against terrorist threats that have metastasized around the world. We went to Afghanistan with our allies in 2001 for clear reasons. One, to get the people who attacked us on 9/11 and to get Osama bin Laden, and to make sure that Afghanistan was not used again as a base from which to attack the United States or our allies. We achieved that objective. We delivered justice to bin Laden more than a decade ago. But the current environment looks very different than it did in 2001. And we have to meet the challenges we face today. We run effective counterterrorism operations around the world, where we know terrorism is more of a threat than it is today in Afghanistan, without any permanent military presence on the ground. And we can and will do the same thing in Afghanistan with our over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability. Cooperation with our closest partners on our enduring counterterrorism mission will continue to be an essential piece of our strategy. In short, we all of us agreed today that we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with our closest partners to meet the current challenges we face in Afghanistan, just as we have for the past 20 years. We're acting in consultation and cooperation with our closest friends and fellow democracies. And I want to again thank all of our allies and partners around the world who have rallied in support of our shared mission. We ended the conversation today by a clear statement on all of our parts. We are going to stay united, locked at the hip in terms of what we have to do. We'll get that done. And tomorrow, I've asked Secretary Blinken to give you an update and a detailed report on exactly how many Americans are still in Afghanistan, how many have gone out, and what our projection is. So thank you again, and God bless you, and may God protect our diplomats and all those in harm's way. Thank you.
Mr. President, can you guarantee every American will be out before
President Biden making some brief remarks about Afghanistan, some significant ones, saying they still intend and are holding to the schedule of pulling out U.S. troops and withdrawing Americans in general by August 31st. The president, however, leaving the door open, talking about consulting with other levels of government about if they would have to extend that timeline. The Taliban has made it clear it wants the U.S. to honor that commitment to get out of Afghanistan by the 31st. Let's bring in NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, what is the thinking right now?
Well, Lester, as you heard from the president right now, the clear headline today is that there is no change in that August 31st timeline for the U.S. to complete its withdrawal from Afghanistan. The president, as you noted, leaving a little wiggle room there, saying there are contingency plans that he's asked from the Pentagon and the State Department if, for, among other reasons, the Taliban no longer allows access to the airport, if there are other disruptions from the Taliban that has been, to this point, the White House says, cooperating with the United States right now. But the president today was facing real pressure from those G7, those leaders around the world who wanted the U.S. to stay there longer, to allow for some of their nationals and certainly for those Afghan allies to be able to get out of the country. And as we focus on that August 31st date, there was a striking acknowledgement from the White House late this afternoon that they're actually going to have to begin that wind down if they stick to that date before August 31st in order to allow the American troops and equipment to get out before that deadline that the president has set. Lester?
Peter Alexander, thanks. And the president, as he has done, continues to talk about this threat of ISIS-K, an enemy of the Taliban, and the risk that the U.S. or others could be the victims of terror attacks in that crowd at the airport. So we continue to watch that. I want to bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who has returned to Kabul. Richard, the president and others have laid out what seems to be a more orderly process of getting those planes loaded and out of there. But can you talk about the risks and what it's like to draw down under this kind of a deadline?
So the process is moving very quickly now. I was on that base earlier today. Planes are coming in almost every minute. It is orderly. Initially, there was a great deal of chaos as Afghans were rushing to the base, pushing in. Some of them were getting into the fence. Now the planes are coming and going with a great degree of regularity. They are trying to empty out that base because, as Peter was just saying, they don't just need to evacuate the Afghans who are there and some of the Afghans who are still going to be heading there. Evacuate all the extra troops who have been brought in. Someone is going to be on the last flight, and that last flight is obviously very dangerous because as soon as that last flight takes in, it is anticipated that the Taliban will move onto that base and take what is now the only remaining piece of Afghanistan that is not in Taliban-controlled hands. There is one part in the mountains where there is a little bit of resistance, but it is very small. This base is the final American and international outpost, and it is from this outpost, from this island in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, that the U.S. is carrying out this massive airlift. What happens next? Afghans who aren't leaving have to take the Taliban at their word. And it seems like the United States and President Biden is taking the Taliban at their word. They're getting aid. They're getting the U.S. leaving on schedule. But President Biden said, They will be watched and judged according to their actions.
All right, Richard Engel back in Kabul for us. I want to bring in retired U.S. Army Colonel and NBC military analyst Jack Jacobs. Jack, there are really two missions here. There was the bigger mission that began months ago of getting U.S. troops out. Now you've got 6,000 on the ground. You're also trying to get American civilians out. How do you accomplish those two things at the same time? Do you simply have to stop the evacuation effort and now move on to getting the troops out?
The short answer is yes. At some juncture, a trail party will be leaving ostensibly on or before the 31st of August. I can't imagine it's going to take place before the 31st of August because it doesn't appear that we're going to be able to get everybody we want to get out of Afghanistan before that time in any case. In the meantime, you're going to require troops to secure, which we are, to secure the airfield and to provide security around the airbase, the airport, to make sure that there's no infiltration. It's not for nothing that we've got 6,000 troops there at the moment. Initially, it was going to be 3,000. The commander on the ground got there, realized that was insufficient. They had to bring another 2,000 in plus support troops. These missions can take place at the same time, but with an enormous amount of difficulty. And the great danger, of course, will be that the Taliban can't control either the people at the bottom of their food chain or anybody else like ISIS, who is ready to infiltrate at any time. A great deal of danger has been said. A great deal of danger for the trail party on the 31st of August.
All right, Jack Jacobs, thank you. Let me bring in Chuck Todd, NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press. Chuck, the president seems to be more concerned about what terrorist groups will do rather than what the Taliban will do if they extend past this August 31st deadline. I guess the question is the White House fearing a political blowback if this thing becomes violent and Americans are in the crosshairs?
Well, I think there's no doubt that is the concern here from the get-go, that the number one thing he's trying to do is secure safe passage of Americans' hard stop. Look, what was not guaranteed in these remarks and what is missing here is what's going to be done about our Afghan allies that we cannot get out by August 31st. And I can tell you, this is where it becomes a political concern for the president and the White House, because every single member of Congress, including many former members of Congress, are hearing from desperate members, veterans in the military who know somebody. You have Afghans, and Richard will tell you this too, he's been a part of this, who are basically calling everybody they know connected in America and getting to Congress. And members of Congress are trying to help these folks individually. That is, I think, going to be the real struggle post-August 31st. What is the plan? What is the strategy? And are we going to negotiate with the Taliban to get these folks out? Are we withholding money to use that as some leverage at the end? That's the type of stuff that's open-ended here. And it is notable to me that the president did promise that his Secretary of State will tell us how many Americans they estimate are left, because that has been something the administration, while they tell you how many people they've taken out, they will not tell you or update us on how many people they think are remaining.
All right, Chuck, thank you. That concludes our coverage of President Biden's remarks in Afghanistan. We'll have much more tonight on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt, NBC News, New York. Good day.
We've been watching an NBC News special report, President Biden talking about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan on August 31st and also celebrating that the House is advancing his agenda. The full House of Representatives got a classified briefing on Afghanistan today before they voted to advance the president's infrastructure plan. So let's get over to NBC News political correspondent Ali Vitale, who's on Capitol Hill. Ali, I understand that briefing ran several hours today. What are you hearing from lawmakers who are in the room?
Well, an hour, Allison, of a briefing this morning with top administration officials, but it's not the only one that lawmakers have gotten. One committee got one yesterday morning. The House Foreign Affairs Committee is going to get another classified briefing tomorrow morning. So these briefings are continuing, and the questions are continuing to mount. The point that Chuck Todd was making on the special report that we were just airing is an important one. Almost all of these lawmakers that we are hearing from on this issue of Afghanistan are hearing from their constituents. Some of them happen to be veterans themselves, people like Congressman Jason Crow, who happen to serve in Afghanistan. There are ties that they have to the region that are personal and now being made political because of the things that are happening on the ground in Afghanistan. For instance, listen to Congressman Crow talking about the Biden administration's decision in regards to this August 31st deadline and what he thinks is about to happen. Listen.
It is not going to be possible to get American citizens out and our Afghan partners and their families out between now and the end of the month. That's why there is broad and deep bipartisan support in Congress and across the country to extend the deadline to make sure that we're doing what's necessary to get folks out. The end of this mission should come not based on a calendar date. It should come when we accomplish the mission.
And Allison, Crow is not the only one to be saying that. Several members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, have echoed that sentiment, that the idea here should be prioritizing the evacuation and not the deadline. If you listen to the president, he did make that point. He threaded that needle, which is to say that they have contingencies in place if they are not done by August 31st. But he also said that he is going to adhere to that deadline, at least as things stand right now. The other point I would make is Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, another veteran here, as we were talking after a press conference today, made the point to me that for right now, the Taliban might be cooperating. At the same time, though, there is a preparation, especially among these lawmakers who know the region well, that this is an adversary, and whether or not they are that today, right now, this moment, they're going to be in the future. That's definitely weighing heavy on their minds as well.
All right, so Allie, let's talk about the House vote late this afternoon to move ahead with President Biden's agenda and what happens next with infrastructure and voting rights now.
Well, there are two separate things here, because while they were all voted to be moved upon, this rule vote, this procedural vote, it was a little sticky getting here, Allison. You and I were talking about this yesterday. It was bogged down in negotiations that started way too late. And so instead of voting on this last night, the procedural motion, instead they did that this afternoon after much back and forth between these 9 moderates and Democratic House leadership, including Speaker Pelosi and her deputies. But where this landed was they've pushed forward on the rule here, and so on infrastructure, we're going to see movement on that in September. It's important because that bipartisan infrastructure bill that was the moderates' key negotiating point here, they've exacted a concession from the leadership, which is to say they're going to see a vote on that on September 27th or before that. We're going to see potentially some push and pull in these coming weeks because progressives, although all of the Democrats voted for this rule, progressives still believe that these are two things that have to be done with reconciliation first and then bipartisanship. Of course, that's the opposite view of this moderate faction. So we're going to see this fight reignite itself again once the House comes back again from recess. That's on the horizon for September. In terms then of what happens on voting rights, right now we're seeing them, I think, still go through the debate process, though as I was standing here with you, they may have moved a little further along. But what's going to happen next is they're going to vote on it. We expect it to pass. That's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And we know the way that voting rights has been interpreted in the Senate. It's likely to hit some snags there. But as far as the House is concerned, they're likely to pass it. Allison?
Allie, I said this to Sahil last hour, and I'll say it to you. It looks like we're queuing up a very busy September on Capitol Hill.
I've got my coffee
Thanks so
ready.
much for reporting. You always do. Always prepared. Time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the latest headlines from NBCNews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison. All right, this hour we start in New York, where new governor Kathy Hochul is now the first woman to hold that office in New York State. Hochul's succession makes her the 9th woman to serve as governor in the U.S. And 100 years after women got the right to vote, there are still 19 states that haven't had a female leader yet. Well, legendary Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts has died. His publicist confirming in a statement that the Hall of Fame musician died peacefully in a London hospital surrounded by his family. Joining the Stones in 1963, Watts was one of the group's longest-lasting members and has been called one of rock and roll's greatest drummers. He was 80 years old. Well, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has agreed to run as the country's vice president in 2022. The move would allow him to stay in power past the country's limited term for presidents. The ruling party is expected to endorse Duterte's aide, an incumbent senator, as the presidential candidate. The president and VP are actually elected separately there. And a World War II veteran reuniting with 3 Italian children he saved in an incredible story here. 97-year-old Martin Adler has held on to a photo from 1944 of himself and those 3 children. His daughter shared the photo on social media, and an Italian reporter was able to find the 3 siblings who are now all in their 80s. Adler traveling from Florida to Italy for the joyful reunion. And it's official. New York City is the most expensive place to rent in the U.S. The Big Apple now surpassing even San Francisco, with the median rent for a 1-bedroom topping $2,810. Yikes. Boston, San Jose, and Washington, D.C. round out the list. New York City's real estate market took a big hit during the pandemic, but prices clearly back up. Allison, I gotta admit, this is kind of a personal victory for me here, because I always get into debates with people about whether it's more expensive to live in LA, where I live, or in New York. And now the data is on my side.
Simone, I will just say it as a New Yorker. There is no place more expensive to live than New York. I don't care what anybody tells you. We just pay more for everything here. You lived here. You know it. No more surveys. It just is what it is.
Thank you. Case closed.
Thanks, Simone. The ACLU launching a legal fight in South Carolina over the ban on school mask mandates. There are now lawsuits in nearly every state blocking mask requirements for students. NBC News correspondent Heidi Prisbilla is outside the ACLU's headquarters in Washington. So, Heidi, we're talking about 8 states here banning mask mandates in school. The ACLU saying these bans disproportionately affect children with pre-existing conditions. Tell us more about this latest lawsuit in South Carolina.
It's just the latest, Allison. This is happening in state after state. There's 8 of them. We counted about 6 where parents are initiating these lawsuits. And the news here is a major national organization now joining this legal fight. They say that these mask mandate bans are actually illegal. They're discriminatory against kids with pre-existing conditions. And I quote from the lawsuit. They say that school districts have a legal obligation to ensure that those children can attend school with the knowledge that the school district has followed recommended protocols to ensure their safety. So, Allison, all around the country, we have parents who are really facing agonizing decisions, parents who have children with pre-existing conditions like asthma, like lung and heart conditions, about whether to send them to school in person without these mandates or to keep them virtual. And they are the lucky ones. There are many parents who cannot send their kids to virtual because they can't do it anymore. They got to go back to work. And we spoke with one of those parents. Her name is Mary Wilson. She lives in South Carolina. She has 2 diabetic 8-year-old twin daughters. She sent them back to school, Allison. She said she had no other choice. And within days, 8-year-old Ella came down with COVID. Here's what Ella said the kids at school were telling her.
Were the kids wearing masks?
Not anyone in my class. And actually, somebody said in my class that COVID's getting better. That's why they don't have to wear masks. It's actually getting worse. One of these boys in my class at my desk said COVID's not even here anymore. That's why he doesn't wear masks.
And thankfully, Allison is recovering, and the Wilsons are not part of the lawsuit. But given that this ban is still in place, Ms. Wilson has to send both of them back to school next week after quarantine, Allison.
Oh, such a frightening and scary situation for so many parents. Heidi, thanks for your reporting. The New York Yankees, Bill Maher, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. You have heard the stories of people getting COVID even though they were vaccinated. We've heard that breakthrough infections are rare, but the numbers are going up. So what's the real risk here? NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres takes a look.
By the numbers, breakthrough infections appear to be rare, yet many across the nation know someone who's had the shot and still got COVID. Actresses Hilary Duff and Melissa Joan Hart are both reporting breakthrough cases just last week.
I got COVID. I am vaccinated, and I got COVID, and it's bad. It's weighing on my chest. It's hard to breathe.
Americans are asking, how worried should the vaccinated be when it comes to catching COVID? A lack of data is making this question hard to answer. NBC News' investigative reporter, Laura Strickler, has been tracking breakthroughs state by state since the beginning of July.
You don't have the CDC requiring every state to provide them with standardized case numbers. So you have certain states that are collecting comprehensive information on breakthrough infections. But then you have a state like Illinois who is not providing with the public with any figures around breakthrough cases.
One state that has provided consistent information is Louisiana, where the unvaccinated make up 89% of COVID cases and 91% of hospitalizations, or more than 2,700 beds filled. As for breakthroughs,
when we went to them a month ago, around July 15th, they had a little over 2,000 cases, 2,000 breakthrough infections. They have now over 14,000. So that's just a month later.
But that's still less than 10% of the more than 150,000 new cases diagnosed in Louisiana since July 15th, where about 40% of people are fully vaccinated. Data from that state and others tracking breakthroughs like Oregon seem to indicate that vaccinated people are testing positive at a much lower rate than those who are unvaccinated. The other good news is vaccines seem to protect against severe COVID, and most people with breakthrough infections have reported mild symptoms, if any at all.
Well, mild in 96%, moderate in 3%, severe in less than 0.05%, with death in less than 0.05%.
But for some, breakthrough COVID can be a shock to the system. Adam Rothman, who received 2 shots of the Moderna vaccine, told NBC News' Vicki Nguyen his infection was no walk in the park.
Fever, chills, fatigue. I had a terrible headache. I was quite sick, and my wife was too.
Outcomes can be far worse. At least 7,800 breakthrough hospitalizations and 1,800 deaths have been reported to date. That's out of what NBC estimates is more than 290,000 breakthrough cases across the U.S. Still, a pretty small number compared to the nearly 190 million Americans who have gotten vaccinated since the beginning of the year. But the data from other countries that are closely tracking the real risk of breakthroughs tells a cautionary story. In Israel, nearly 60% of all hospitalized patients are fully vaccinated. It's part of why the country is recommending another shot for protection. Those most at risk tend to be older Americans, typically age 65 and up, according to the CDC and data from Israel as well. Breakthroughs have been seen with Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J vaccines. But because they've been rolled out at different times and given to people with different backgrounds, it's difficult to compare them head-to-head. Experts warn breakthrough infections are likely to rise in the coming months, regardless of which shot you got. It's the fact that vaccine immunity is waning, the Delta variant is spreading quickly, and there's a huge number of unvaccinated people. All of these things coincide with breakthrough cases in the middle. That's why getting the shot and measures like wearing masks indoors, limiting large gatherings, and practicing social distancing are still the best weapons against the virus.
A rare glimpse inside an overrun ICU in Oregon. Doctors and nurses there struggling to save COVID patients. NBC's Portland affiliate KGW has a look at the emotional toll it's taking.
On the highway west of Redmond, a cry for help. St. Charles Medical implores people to get the COVID vaccine, reminding them 97% of patients who ended up in the hospital did not have it. Some who ignore the plea end up here at the main hospital in Bend, which handles trauma cases for 3 counties in Central Oregon, and now is filling up with some very sick COVID patients.
Most of our COVID patients are in the back.
In the ICU, lives hang in the balance.
Do you need more help?
She's calling family.
This patient is trying to die right now. We're trying to get a hold of family to let them know that transitions are happening.
That's Monica Schultz, the ICU manager. Earlier this week, we were given exclusive access to St. Charles to show you what it's like behind the scenes in the fight against COVID. We've agreed not to identify any of the patients here. 8 are suffering from COVID-19 and are on ventilators. The woman she's talking about is in her 50s and was admitted to the hospital just 7 days ago.
This patient is still a full code, so we are still going to continue to do everything. The unfortunate thing is we have nothing left to give.
Nurses inside the hospital room are manually pumping air into the patient's body. But it may just be a matter of time before she's gone. ER Dr. Jillian Salton has seen an endless stream of COVID patients and is like many on the front lines, burned out.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, it's hard.
She's haunted by the fact that there are people in the community not getting the care they need because of COVID patients.
What keeps me up at night are the patients who aren't getting their surgery for their colon cancer because we're full of COVID patients. And that's what I lie awake thinking about every night. I think about the patients that I am discharging from the emergency department who normally would be admitted to the hospital, but I've got no place to put them. So we say, well, just go home and hope you don't die. Wow. Yeah.
She later changed that to come back if you get sicker, but you get the idea. The doctors, nurses, everyone, it seems, are tired, frustrated, and angry enough to start saying out loud what they've been thinking privately for a long time. None of this would be happening if those eligible just got vaccinated. I asked what it's like to leave the hospital in constant battle with the COVID virus and then walk into a grocery store and see people not wearing their masks.
It's hard. I walk around grocery stores looking at people and wondering what they look like when they're going to get in the ICU. It's pretty difficult to deal with.
What's the nitric at?
Back at the ICU, the body language of the nurses trying to save the woman in her 50s suggests resignation. They are out of options.
We have 3 patients that are doing very poorly this afternoon, and I expect that probably not any of them will make it through the night.
Both the woman in her 50s and a second COVID patient here, neither one vaccinated, died by 7 p.m. Another hard day in the ICU.
For the full story, head to kgw.com. One of Rudy Giuliani's former associates expected to plead guilty to federal campaign finance charges tomorrow. You might remember his name, Igor Fruman, the Ukrainian-born businessman who pleaded not guilty to those charges back in October of 2019. But now it looks like he might be changing his tune. NBC News correspondent for investigations, Tom Winter, here to explain. So, Tom, the case's court docket says there's a change of plea hearing scheduled tomorrow. We're all intrigued. What do you know?
Well, Allison, as a matter of fact, the reason why I was slightly late getting to the camera here is that, in fact, it has just been changed to September 10th. So, yes, so they've changed this. This was kind of expected. I don't need to go into all the details on it, but basically they're just pushing it back. Not going to change anything here. It's a change of plea hearing, which for somebody who's previously pleaded guilty, they're going to change that plea. Guess what? That means that they're expected to now plead guilty, and that's Igor Fruman, who we're looking at there on screen. A business associate of Lev Parnas, the two of them having done numerous attempted business dealings with the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney. And that's why he's somebody who's caught our attention in the past, and obviously somebody whose name came up during the impeachment probe, somebody who was arrested on his way to Vienna, and somebody who's been part of the ongoing intrigue surrounding this whole Ukraine mess, Allison.
So many questions that I have for you, Tom. Let me ask this. In the original indictment, federal prosecutors alleged that Fruman and his business partner also schemed to get rid of the U.S. ambassador. That charge, though, wasn't included in the superseding indictment. Do we know why not? Why is that not part of this?
Well, that's one of the kind of the ongoing mysteries here as to why that wasn't included going forward, and just trying to understand the background of it. But I think when we're looking at Fruman and his attorney, Todd Blanche, there on his left-hand side, I think we're looking at somebody who is probably not one of the key figures in all of this, in somebody who was certainly involved in the criminal activity, according to the charging documents, and apparently now by his guilty plea, he'll admit to doing so. But when I look at the two kind of main figures in all of this, Lev Parnas is the one who really stands out.
So you've mentioned so many names here that we've heard before, Tom. NBC News has reported Fruman and his business partner, Lev Parnas, were helping Rudy Giuliani hunt for dirt on Donald Trump's political opponents in Ukraine. And those aren't all of the names involved here at all. There are several others. Do we have any sense of whether Fruman is cooperating with authorities here, whether against Giuliani or anybody else? Have we gotten any comment from his lawyers or prosecutors to indicate whether this may be part of a bigger plan here?
Sure. Well, you're alluding, Allison, really to kind of one of the key points on this, and that first off, with respect to Fruman, and to directly answer your question, there's no indication from any of the documents or anything that's been filed in the court docket that he has any sort of cooperation agreement. Now, by pleading guilty, you can get the advantage of getting less time from a sentencing standpoint without the cooperation component of it. But there's no indication that that's the case here. And I think really when we look at those two, as I kind of alluded to earlier, Lev Parnas is really the key guy here. And so I would suspect that if you're Rudy Giuliani, you're much more concerned about any potential involvement involving Lev Parnas in a possible plea deal. We haven't heard anything like that. But if you were him, that's the person you'd be more concerned about, the person you're looking at on screen, Allison.
Tom, I was looking forward to see what happens tomorrow. We will sit tight, though, and wait till the 10th, I believe you said. This is going to be interesting, and I know you'll be all over it. Thank you.
More to come. Sure thing.
Receding floodwaters helping rescue crews who are still searching for Tennessee residents today. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson is in Waverly, Tennessee, which really bore the brunt of the damage. Priscilla, I understand search crews are able to get better access today because those waters are finally going down a bit. But my gosh, the stories out of Waverly have been absolutely devastating. What's the latest there?
Yeah, Allison, we now have an updated death toll here. The number at 18, that is ticking down a bit from where it was earlier this week. Officials saying that some people who died of natural causes were mistakenly included in that original count. There are also still 3 people missing, 2 of whom we're told are under the age of 18, according to officials. But in the midst of all of this loss and devastation, I also want to take a moment to talk about how this community has come together, and that is why we are here in the front yard of Chelsea Chrisman, who was out of town when all this happened, but came back in order to help her community out. And so you can see they've got dozens of bottles of water, cases of water piled up here for anyone who wants to come by and get some. They have also been serving food to everyone in this community. Some folks have literally just been driving by on the road and picking up that food. These folks coming in from Louisiana to be a part of this effort here. And not to mention the huge amounts of clothing and shoes that have been donated. There are cleaning supplies back there for folks who are still cleaning up. Their kitchen is full of non-perishable items. And this is a woman's front yard, and it's not a business. And I want to play a little bit of her story, where she was when all of this happened and why it was so important for her to do this. Take a listen.
Had just landed in Florida, and we immediately got service and got all the messages as to what was going on here. And we also got the message that our 19-year-old son was trapped in the local grocery store and couldn't get out. And so we, just obviously prayed and cried was the first responses, but we just knew that we had to hurry up and get home to help our town and our community.
And Allison, the good news in this story that her son was able to climb up to the top of that grocery store and stay there for hours until the water receded, and now he is here today working alongside his mom to help this community. Allison?
Priscilla, the news out of Waverly has been so devastating. Thank you so much for showing us a bit of a bright spot, a community that's coming together. We appreciate you.
Ever upward is more than just our state's motto. It's who we are, and it's where we're going.
New York has its first female governor, and she says she's ready to get to work. Kathy Hochul became governor at midnight with a ceremonial swearing in later in the day. She replaces Andrew Cuomo, who resigned over allegations that he sexually harassed several women. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns has more on the incoming governor's first orders of business.
Allison, New York's first female governor spent a good deal of her address introducing herself to New Yorkers, assuring folks that she is the woman to get the job done. And the job is pretty big. She dove right into the primary task at hand, which is COVID-19 and containing the Delta variant. She spent a lot of time talking especially about education, as this is the time kids are going back into the classroom. She announced a vaccine mandate for all school personnel in the state, with a test out option. She also announced the launch of testing in schools from the state. I want you to hear what she had to say on that.
We need to require vaccinations for all school personnel with an option to test out weekly, at least for now. To accomplish this in New York, we need partnerships with all levels of government, and I'm working now on getting this done.
Allison, she also talked about getting COVID relief funds into the hands of New Yorkers more quickly. She criticized the slow rollout of the funding under her predecessor. She says she's going to speed up the process. And, of course, another big priority for her, Allison, a change in culture. She says she's going to overhaul the state policy around sexual harassment and ethics. And she did announce that her two top positions, her secretary and her counsel, will be women. So you now have a trio of women sitting at the top of the New York State government, an office that has been mired in allegations of sexual harassment. She says this will be a new day in New York State.